Did you know that your taxpayer funds are going towards animal testing? Each and every one of you taxpayers in this room are indirectly funding animal experimentation. This inexcusable misuse of taxpayer funds is unethical and unnecessary. Can I start over?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Okay.
It's okay.
Did you know your taxpayer funds are going towards animal testing? Each and every one of you taxpayers in this room are indirectly funding animal experimentation. This inexcusable misuse of taxpayer funds is unethical and unnecessary. American taxpayer funds and government funds in general should not be going towards animal testing. Today, I will be explaining the U.S. government's involvement in animal experimentation, how we can combat this issue, as well as alternatives we can implement to eliminate this barbaric practice.
Of course, it'll freeze up now.
I assume you all know who this is in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. If you don't, this is Dr. Anthony Fauci, an American physician and the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases under the NIH. On October 25th, just a few weeks ago, Fauci was exposed for funding a torturous and gruesome animal experiment based in Tunisia. According to The Hill, Fauci's NIH division shipped part of a $375,000 grant to a lab in Tunisia to drug beagles and lock their heads in mesh cages filled with hungry sandflies so that their faces would be eaten alive. They also locked beagles alone in cages in the desert for 9 consecutive nights overnight with no food or water to be used as bait to attract infectious sandflies. Some of these beagles even had their vocal cords removed so that scientists wouldn't be annoyed by their incessant barking. This unthinkable torture was committed by our government, the government who should lead fairly and ethically, and who we should be able to trust. There had to have been another, less barbaric way to test a drug than by having puppies' faces be eaten alive, right? Apparently not, because this is not the first instance in which the U.S. government, specifically the NIH, has used taxpayer funds to fund animal experimentation. According to Congressman Fred Keller, McMaster University in Canada has cashed in on more than $2 million from the NIH since 2015 to force-feed human feces to mice before restraining them, measuring their anxiety, killing them, and dissecting them. American taxpayer funds have been funding animal experimentation for decades and completely under the radar. Note that both of the experiments I mentioned took place outside of the United States. This is a prime example of outsourcing ethics. The reason why not many know about the U.S. involvement in animal testing is largely due to the fact that animal tests take place in not domestic facilities. There could be many reasons for this, but it appears that the U.S. government does not want taxpayers knowing where their funds are being allocated. According to PETA, quote, through their taxes, members of the public are ultimately the ones who, knowing or unknowingly, fund animal experimentation. Also note that both of the experiments I mentioned were funded by the NIH, or the National Institute of Health. The NIH is a federal agency that conducts medical research, meaning it works with the government to administer tests, experiments, and trials. According to Congressman Fred Keller, the NIH spent an estimated $140 million in 2020 on animal testing in foreign countries. Additionally, the NIH funded labs in 29 countries, and as many as 357 of those labs in 57 countries are eligible for American taxpayer dollars. According to PETA, 47% of NIH-funded research involves animal experiments, and in 2020, the NIH budgeted $42 billion for research and development of animal experiments. The NIH is one of the largest sources of funding for animal experimentation. This ample funding for such a heinous act is extremely concerning, especially coming from such a medically modern and innovative country. Government involvement in animal testing can be seen through two main things: ample funding and lack of animal protection laws. As reported in the journal Alternatives to Animal Research, Testing, and Education, quote, government regulatory practices can be read as promoting animal testing, although the laws and practices appear flexible. This is indeed correct. The government perceives itself as against animal testing cruelty, yet continues to fund and execute animal experiments under the NIH, like I showed you today. According to PETA, 99% of the animals used in laboratories aren't covered by federal animal protection laws. And according to the article, the journal Alternatives to Animal Use in Research, Testing, and Education, the U.S. government has the most power to end animal testing. Quote, the federal government plays a major role in this area, both through laws that indirectly or directly require testing and guidelines that influence testing procedures. A very important point to make is that results from animal testing are not always applicable to humans. One, because animal biology does not equal human biology. According to this Encyclopedia of Science, Technology, and Ethics, quote, because the relationship between an organism's higher functions and their underlying biology is very complex, it's impossible to predict with certainty how an agent will affect humans based on experiments done with other species. And according to the Washington Post, quote, human subjects have been harmed in the clinical testing of drugs that were deemed safe by animal studies. In fact, the Food and Drug Administration does not even require drugs to be tested on animals. 95% of pharmaceuticals that show promise in preclinical animal research fail to make it to the human pharmaceutical market, according to the journal Lost in Translation, Why Animal Testing Fails to Deliver on Its Promise. Now I'll read an excerpt from the book Animal Rights and Moral Philosophy. Quote, much of it, animal testing, is counterproductive. Tests on animals often give false negatives when the substance in question would actually benefit humans. And now we'll read a personal testimony from the journal Findings from 103 Healthcare Professionals on Attitudes to Animal Experimentation. Quote, that's why there's a branch of veterinary medicine for animals and our medicine for humans. These were not compatible with each and every drug an animal is, and I just don't think it's right to test our drugs on them. So, with all this evidence negating the legitimacy of animal testing, why does the NIH feel so inclined to fund such an unnecessary and unethical practice? Now, the alternatives to animal testing. The most straightforward way to end animal testing in the U.S. is to cut any and all U.S. federal funding from animal testing facilities. We can also support organizations and initiatives that work to end animal experimentation. One being PETA, which is a nonprofit organization that works to protect animal rights. Next, White Coat Waste Project, which is a watchdog group that exposes taxpayer-funded animal experiments. And lastly, Cruelty Free International, that is an animal advocacy group that is working towards the complete abolition of animal testing. And most importantly, we can implement alternatives to eliminate this barbaric practice. One being cell cultures. According to Cruelty Free International, cell cultures are cells that are made under controlled conditions in a laboratory. They are often used to recreate cell structures like the kidneys, lungs, and heart. Cell cultures have been used to make developments in cancer, AIDS, and other seriously life-threatening diseases. So advancements made with cell cultures would give results more pertaining to humans than animal studies. Next, human tissue. Human tissue donated from volunteers, patients, and even those who have passed would provide results pertaining more to humans than to animals. According to the Humane Society, 100 million animals are used in experiments each year in the U.S. The alternatives I mentioned today would help save some of those 100 animals. And even if only a few are saved, or even one is always better than none. In conclusion, American taxpayer funds and government funds in general should not be going towards animal testing. The United States needs to be more see-through about one, what taxpayer funds are being allocated to, two, what the NIH is exactly funding, and three, the U.S. government needs to rethink how they treat animals. As Mahatma Gandhi once said, the greatness of a nation and its moral progress can be judged by how its animals are treated.